Hello Exiles, this is Ryan from Behind Eyes Gaming and welcome to another Path of Exile 2 video. In today's video, I'm going to explain how to potentially still do Herald Chains even after making it so that they can't chain off of each other, as well as going over my Ice Strike Invoker and the changes that have been made and how it's going to be played going forward. It seems like there were definitely nerfs, like there were to everything, but they don't seem very extreme, and there's actually a few little things that potentially could make the build better in some ways. So let's go ahead and get into the first thing that a lot of people might be interested in, which is how exactly are we going to continue to chain our heralds together in order to get massive clear, because this is something that we previously did by simply converting a portion of Herald of Ice's damage to lightning and then a portion of Herald of Thunder's to cold, so that Herald of Thunder could freeze and Herald of Ice could shock, and thus they would chain off each other instantly or infinitely. Now, with this new setup, that's no longer going to be able to happen, which is kind of a good thing for this build specifically, because we're probably not going to be able to run two heralds anyway. However, there is a little bit of tech that we can do on pretty much any build. It's going to require a little bit of investment, but a lot of what you're going to be doing is something you'd be doing anyway. So let me just pull up my notepad here and I can go over that. So first thing you're going to want to do is anoint Explosive Impact. And if you don't know, Explosive Impact is this node right here. It's fairly cheap to anoint. 1 Greed, Disgust, and Fear distill. And what it is 15% area of effect, quite good because all of our stuff kind of scales off AoE anyway. And then burning enemies you kill have a 5% chance to explode, dealing 1/10 of their maximum life as fire damage. Now, in order to continue to get that, first of all, it's 5%, so it's not going to be super reliable, but in very, very large packs, I still think it'll proc pretty often. Witch Hunter has an even better potential setup for this, which is with Zealous Inquisition, which gives twice the amount. However, Invoker has a little bit of a unique advantage because of I Am the Blizzard and I Am the Thunder, but I'll go over that a little bit more once I go over the rest of the combo. So you'll need the Unique Gloves Painter's Servant, and I'll pull those up here. What Painter's Servant do is they convert all of your elemental damage 33% into each element, kind of equalizing all of them, and then they have up to 10%, potentially 12% with good corruption. So you'll probably want to try to fish for a good one, and you'll want to be corrupting these as much as you can, but and possibly a corruption to give a higher percent conversion to specifically whatever herald you're using, so in this case cold. But you would want the extra damage as elements, so you can get up to 30% or potentially up to 36% there, as well as on the tree you can get a little bit of extra from Essence of the Storm and Essence of the Mountain. And then of course, as I mentioned, with Invoker specifically, you have I Am the Blizzard and I Am the Thunder. So since those are generic and global, those should scale the Fire Explosion, which should be converted into 3 elements from Explosive Impact. Now, 1/10 of their life isn't that much, but that, assuming it can be scaled properly, we have a couple of ways to do that. So you're just going to want a bunch of generic elemental damage, damage if crit recently, or any kind of non-specific damage. In this build, we have some elemental damage over here, along with just increased damage of all the elements in high amounts in Echoing Thunder. We have generic damage, where you get 20% and then 20% and then 30% damage if you dealt crit recently, as well as Crashing Wave, 33% damage if you've dealt crit recently. And as far as elemental damage goes, we have up to 15% can be rolled on jewels. And I get a lot of jewel slots, so potentially you can have 4, 5, 6 of these pretty easily. Currently, I only have 2 in my build that have generic elemental damage, but you would want to be going for as high a roll as you can possibly get. And you would also potentially want to maybe more focus secondarily, instead of just generic damage with quarterstaffs. You could, for instance, if you were going Herald of Ice, go specifically with the ice damage. You also get generic damage while affected by Herald from this, as well as Coming Calamity, which gives 50% increased cold damage while affected by Herald of Ice. So with all of that, you would get a pretty decent boost, potentially 200-300% boost. Then it's more like 40%, and then you would in this case get a bunch of as extra as well, both increasing the chance of freeze and also basically doing almost the entire damage of the monster's life pool to whatever you hit, which then potentially freezes, which then potentially sets off Herald of Ice, which then potentially does it again. And you could potentially do this with 2 Heralds as well. With my build, I'm probably going down to 1, but that might just increase the chance of getting chain procs. Unfortunately, 5%, once again, unreliable, but in huge packs, you're going to hit it sometime, and if you have a decent amount of AoE scaling as well, you're probably going to hit enough monsters to keep this going. And I think, potentially, this could be a good way to get that chain clear. So, a lot of investment, takes up a unique glove spot, which could potentially be used for Hand of Wisdom in action, which is nerfed for sure, but probably still pretty good. Not going to be nearly as good as it is this patch, but it's still going to be a lot of DPS regardless. Certainly still going to be a chase item, I imagine. But this is an alternative, and it's with a much more common unique. You are going to want, like, good corruptions on it potentially though. So that's kind of my solution. There might be even more ways to add a good amount of generic damage as well, but this is what I kind of have going on my build. Attack damage isn't going to work. Damage with quarterstaffs isn't going to work. This is just fire damage converted to whatever elemental type. I currently don't have these nodes allocated in my current version of the build, but yeah, it's just going to be useful overall, I think. Okay, so let's get into the changes for Invoker. I have the changes here and my thoughts. The And Protect Me from Harm Ascendancy passive now provides 50% less evasion instead of 40%. This is, of course, quite a powerful setup. Currently, it's providing me with basically 15k armor on top of the 15k evasion I have. Most mapping, this is going to be good enough, especially considering how infrequently you're hit with that much evasion. However, the evasion rating is going to go down a little bit. So yeah, you're just going to have a little bit less of it. I still think that it is going to be supremely powerful in late campaign if you get it as your second ascendancy, as well as throughout pretty much up until end game, up until red maps. It might fall off a little bit. They also are nerfing acrobatics, so that's going to be 75% less evasion rating. Normally, if you got a very high evasion rating, you could go into acrobatics instead of And Protect Me from Harm and get a little bit more benefit there, especially against bosses and whatnot and all the different slams. But I do think And Protect Me from Harm is still going to be quite good. Hard to say how significant it'll be is what I wrote. Previously, taking the second made you practically immortal until late maps if built right, so I imagine this is still strong. Yep, that's my initial thought, still stands there. Lead Me Through Grace. Ascendancy passive skill now provides 1 spirit for every 8 energy shield on equipped body armor, previously 6, and 1 spirit for every 20 evasion rating on equipped body armor, previously 15. So how is that going to affect our spirit? Well, pretty significantly. So here we have my end game body armor piece with 1390 evasion and 531. So I have the math here. It's simply 1390 divided by 20, 69.5, and 531 divided by 8, 66. 135, and then you add the baseline 100 that you get 235 is what I would have compared to the 280. However, I currently have a 20 spirit buffer, so I only need 260. That means all I have to do in the end game is simply drop a Herald. Also, won't be able to run Grim Feast. Grim Feast is gone. You could replace this with Ghost Dance or simply not run it. And then you could either run double Heralds or still run one Herald and be able to, if we get rid of 2 Heralds here, for instance, I have 80 leftover Spirit. That means I only require 200. And that means I would be able to run this build with significantly less. Now, if you did that, you would probably want some sort of means of recovering your energy shield. One of the ways you can do that is putting on your Wind Dancer. I'll have to go because I don't remember the name of the skill, but there is a support gem that gives you Energy Barrier. There it is. Energy Barrier recharge begins immediately and is not interrupted by damage for 2 seconds while stun using unsupported skills. Stun is going to be buffed on monsters, so you might be able to get that. Another cool thing about the tree here is I'm pretty close to Deft Recovery, which gives a bunch of stun recovery. So you can just pop into these, and even though you will get stunned a little bit easier, and even though you'll have to figure out, or I'll have to figure out how to drop points elsewhere, for the most part, this will help a little bit with that. So getting that, and you might even get all 3 of these potentially points. So that can help, and then you get energy recharge whenever, or you can just go Ghost Dance if you'd prefer. You still might want to get that anyway because mitigating stuns going to become more important. You might also, now that Ingenuity is getting nerfed, just get a belt with Charm Slot, although Ingenuity is coming with Charm Slots now, so potentially you still take Ingenuity and you simply put an anti-stun charm on your belt. So that's an option as well. So next thing we have is Elemental Expression. So this one is, oh yeah, the other thing to note, I suppose, in Lead Me Through Grace is that we don't know how much percentage defenses the greater steel runes give yet. At least I wasn't able to find that. So it's possible you could get higher evasion energy shield on body armors if it's higher than the current 20%. If it's like 25% and you have a nice 3 socket like I do, this would be 75% increased armor evasion instead. You'll get a higher baseline and that'll give you more leeway with Spirit. So keep that in mind as well. Ice Strike changes, none listed. There might be numerical ones. The one thing we do know is that melee skills got reduced mana cost scaling. So I think it went from 14% per level to 9% per level. So that means mana cost is going to be greatly reduced. On top of that, the cast on crit setup that I use, I previously had to kind of jump through hoops and add Frost Bomb and Sniper's Mark in order to maintain mana cost by basically increasing the amount of energy required to proc cast on crit by double, by adding additional mana cost basically, and cast time and cooldown, all that kind of stuff. And that would make it so that cast on crit would proc half as often. I have a whole video on that. It should be in a playlist that I'll link below along with all of my previous monk videos. But more or less the way this works, and I also put on inspiration on top of that. So really had to do a lot to get that to go. But there's another big change that is going to make cast on crit a lot easier to keep up, which means we'll be able to keep Eye of Winter procking more consistently without draining all of our mana. We still proc Eye of Winter constantly, but you'll see what I mean momentarily when we get there. And that is actually right away because the bell changes. So Tempest Bell's impact now deals 146 to 490 of attack damage at gem levels 3 to 20, previously 145 to 316, now requires 10 combo to use, previously 4, and the bell is destroyed after 10 hits at all gem levels, previously 10 to 19 at gem levels. So we're getting 9 less hits, basically less than half the effect, especially because quality now gives 0 to 2 hits. So we're going up to 12 hits basically, with previously being at 25. So about half the hits. To compensate, we get a little more top end damage at higher gem levels. It seems to scale harder too, so potentially extra gem levels might be helpful, but that's not really something that I do currently. Probably not something I'm going to bother doing. The burst damage is going to be lower. However, there's some good things to this, which I mentioned already. Mana cost. So I'm going to just jump ahead one before this. Tempest Bell can now only trigger a shockwave every 250 milliseconds, so 4 per second. This value is a strict limit, not a cooldown. As such, it can't be modified with cooldown recovery modifiers. So now we can only proc the bell every 4 times every second. So that means it's always going to take 3 seconds basically to destroy the bell and to get off the entire damage, which at level 20 is 11,172% damage with our build, because we're going to get 90% damage as extra, 90% physical as extra specifically. So actually maybe a little bit less than that, which is still a very significant amount of damage. It was already probably the best burst skill, or one of the best burst skills in the game outside of, some ice wall shenanigans. So it hasn't been nerfed as much as you would think. And it's been buffed in that what would happen before is you would drop your bell and Cast on Crit would go off, and Eye of Winter would hit it with all of its projectiles, instantly hitting all 25 of those, which would then proc more Cast on Crits, basically, ad infinitum. It would just burst your mana down. If you've ever tried with like weak mana sustain, and before I added like the Frostbomb Sniper's Mark tech to the build, all your mana would go away the moment you drop Tempest Bell, 100% every time, no matter how much you had, pretty much. So this is going to stop that from happening. You're not going to proc Cast on Crit nearly as much. You still might need to take the extra Sniper's Mark Frostbomb inspiration on Cast on Crit. One thing is for certain though, with specifically Ice Strike for bossing, you're probably going to want to use your combo support, which is going to be where are we? I might have gotten rid of it or put it in here somewhere. Practiced combo, which gives you a chance to build up an additional combo on hit. Just being able to drop more bells is going to be useful in bossing still, I believe. So it's probably going to outweigh like an extra damage. We had some pretty suboptimal damage links here anyway, like Rising Tempest wasn't very good, although we are getting more damage links, which I will go over in a little bit to replace that with. In fact, as far as damage links go, Ice Strike is looking very, very, very good. So, but now let's get to the next Tempest Bell part. Tempest Bell Shockwave no longer deals 30% more damage per elemental ailment affecting the bell. This was obviously huge. We could get, a good amount. So I would get Freeze, Shock, Ignite, Chill, and as well Electrocute. So that is already 5 different elemental damage types. I was getting 150% more damage via that line before on bells, which already had an absurd amount of damage scaling and burst damage. And it no longer has the physical conversion. So it's gotten rid of all of that, and instead gains 30% of physical damage as extra damage of each type matching an elemental ailment on the bell. Meaning if you have 3 damage type ailments, so I'm assuming Electrocute and Shock basically just count as lightning. I don't think you're going to get 60%. I think you'll just get 30% lightning. So you get 30% of each element, and it now deals 60 to 132% of attack damage at gem levels compared to 96 and 211, which means I actually did my math wrong. This is the initial impact. The shockwave is, so my math was way off here. I'm going to edit that out, ignore that. So actually I'll just calculate it here, 211% times 12 times, so let's get the new number. So 211% times 12 times 1.9. Okay, So 400 or 4,810 roughly. 4,810. And then we divide that by 3 because it's going to take 3 seconds to destroy it. So it's 1603 per second. Percent damage multiplier. So you can basically compare it to attacking. It's basically on like Hammer of the Gods perfect strike level still in terms of damage multiplier. So even after that, you're still looking at one of the best burst damages in the game. All right. So looking at that, Tempest Bells limit on number of bells placed is now shared between different copies of the skill. I never ran this, doesn't matter for the build, still was insta-melting everything, so largely irrelevant. Alright, on-kill effects of Herald skills can no longer trigger from kills caused by Herald skills. No more Herald Chains, we can drop a Herald freeing Spirit, and then we had a nerf on the radius of explosions and impact for Herald of Thunder and Herald of Ice respectively. So yeah, I kind of went over what we're going to have to do for that specifically earlier. So the last thing I kind of want to talk about is with the Amazon coming, some of the new supports that were added incidentally help the Invoker. There is a new support gem that does 25% more melee damage if you've hit with a ranged attack recently, and 25% more range damage if you've hit with a melee attack recently, and they only support ranged and melee specifically. So we have ourselves a ranged attack here, I believe, via Charged Staff. I think the Shockwave counts as a ranged attack. At least it's a projectile. This may or may not be true, but I think it does count with electricity, lightning shockwave. But I guess it doesn't have the ranged tag on it. So maybe not. Maybe actually that doesn't work at all. But potentially, maybe, Charged Staff counts. And if so, then you simply throw that on and you get a nice little more damage multiplier. There are also some other interesting, like Hobbling Strikes, which gives different benefits to your first, second, and third strike. First strike skills could potentially be decent. I'll have to look into that a little bit more, but more or less, I think the build's going to be very good still. I do think the build's going to be extremely strong, and yeah, hope you enjoy. I am probably playing a spear build to start with though, so I'm probably going to either be a spear invoker or a spear ritualist, which is the new Amazon ascendancy, or one of the two new Amazon ascendancies. So I may be playing invoker again, but it'll be a spear and shield build, or you might see me on a ritualist. We will see what I feel like the numbers look like on the spear skills and what kind of synergies I can get. Hope you enjoyed. This has been Ryan from Behind Eyes Gaming, and I'll see you next time. Bye.